Marc Tardif was one of the most dominant yet overlooked players of the 1970s, a two-time WA MVP, a Stanley Cup champion, and the WHA's all-time leading goal scorer. But his incredible career was nearly cut short in 1976 when a brutal and senseless attack left him severely injured and fighting for his future. Though he battled back to achieve his greatest successes on the ice, the emotional scars of that night never fully faded. This is the story of Marc Tardif, his rise to stardom, the violent act that changed everything, and the unexpected reunion that helped him find peace. Raised in the heartland of passionate Quebec hockey, Tardif found his calling early. He stood out even in his teenage years, commanding the attention of scouts and coaches who recognized in him not just raw athletic ability, but also a certain kind of fire, the fearless determination to excel no matter the obstacles. In the late 1960s, junior hockey in Canada was ablaze with talent, and Tardif was right in the thick of it. He represented the Montreal Junior Canadiens, a juggernaut of a squad that featured future stars like Gilbert Perreault, Regine Houle, Guy Charon, and André Dupont, among others. That 1968-69 team has gone down in hockey lore as one of the most devastatingly skilled and cohesive junior units to ever take the ice, often ranked alongside the greatest junior rosters in Canadian history. It wasn't surprising when these junior Canadians steamrolled their way to the Memorial Cup in 1969, a crown that confirmed them as Canada's top junior team. Fortune seemed to follow Tardif's every stride. In 1969, because of an archaic draft rule that granted the Montreal Canadiens 2 priority picks of French-Canadian players, Tardif was chosen second overall by one of hockey's most storied franchises. The Canadiens were in the midst of a transitional phase, but the bar for success remained impossibly high. The legacy of the Flying Frenchman was iconic, and any newcomer would need to earn his place on a roster loaded with Hall of Famers. For Tardif, the dream began rather humbly, with time spent on Montreal's American Hockey League affiliate, the Montreal Voyageurs. He proved his worth immediately, scoring 58 points in just 45 games. That performance, so electric it almost demanded attention, earned him a call-up to the Canadiens in February 1970. Yet Tardif's early forays into the National Hockey League, NHL, featured more than their share of uphill battles. On a team already stocked with superstars like Jean Beliveau, Frank Mahavlich, Yvon Cournoyer, Jacques Lemaire, and Henri Richard, icetime was a precious commodity. Tardif was forced to adapt to a supporting role, a situation that might frustrate many young, skilled players, but also forced him to develop grit, resilience, and defensive responsibility. Over the next 3 seasons, he showcased his scoring punch by netting 19, then 25, then 31 goals while alternating among different lines. This was no small feat, given that the Habs coaching staff scrutinized every shift and typically emphasized defense over offense. Tardif had a reputation for toughness to match his scoring. The penalty minutes he logged in 1970-71 demonstrated he was not one to back down from a challenge or a scrap. While he wasn't a goon by any stretch, he could hold his own against bigger players and dish out hits that belied his smooth skating style. The reward for his ferocity and offensive hustle came in the form of 2 Stanley Cup championships with Montreal, in 1971 and 1973. Still, he occasionally clashed with head coach Scotty Bowman, whose emphasis on a meticulous defensive system sometimes conflicted with Tardif's more freewheeling creativity. Bowman questioned Tardif's defensive commitment, while Tardif sometimes grew impatient with limited opportunities. Change soon beckoned. In 1973, the fledgling World Hockey Association was offering large contracts to NHL players, particularly to those who felt underpaid or underappreciated. Tardif, earning around $40,000 with the Canadiens, received a jaw-dropping offer of $250,000 over 3 years from the Los Angeles Sharks. The Habs countered with an $80,000 deal, but only for a single year. The difference was too vast to ignore. Tardif seized the WA contract, lured by guaranteed money and the chance to star on a new stage. Thus began the next chapter of Tardif's career. Unfortunately, the Los Angeles Sharks were a troubled franchise from the outset: light fan support, subpar practice facilities, and an overall lack of direction. Tardif found little chemistry in his new environment. It took him 10 games before he finally potted his first goal, and though he ended the season with a respectable 70 points, It felt like an underachievement for someone with Tardif's gifts. His scoring clip rebounded some, highlighted by 40 goals, but the entire experience was a far cry from the storied professional ecosystem of Montreal. The Sharks had financial woes so severe that relocation soon became inevitable. In April 1974, the franchise moved to Michigan and rebranded itself as the Michigan Stags. That move, however, only deepened the organizational chaos, leading to abysmal performances on and off the ice. By January of the following year, the Stags were hemorrhaging money and needed to shed Tardif's big contract. They found a partner in the Quebec Nordics, whose fanbase was eager for a marquee star to electrify their lineup. In exchange for 3 journeymen, Pierre Goutet, Alain Boom Boom Caron, and Michel Rouleau, Tardif finally returned to his home province to play alongside old friend Regine Houle and emerging talents like Chris Bordelot and real Buddy Cloutier. In Quebec, Tardif thrived. The moment he donned the Nordics uniform, the synergy was immediate. Over the last 53 games of that campaign, he plundered 38 goals, raising his season total to 50. The Quebec fan base fell in love with him, attendance jumped by thousands, and the Nordics knew they had a goldmine on their hands. They rewarded Tardif with a then unheard-of 10-year contract, an extraordinary vote of confidence in his ability to carry the franchise to new heights. For Tardif himself, it was a homecoming filled with promise and renewed passion. By the mid-1970s, pro hockey had entered an era marked by an intensifying goon culture, with brawlers and enforcers playing increasingly central roles in intimidating opponents and protecting star players. The Nordics organization recognized that their top talent, Tardif and the other skilled forwards, needed protection. General manager Maurice Fillion stocked the roster with a formidable cast of enforcers, including Gordie Machine Gun Gallant, Kurt Brackenberry, Steve Sutherland, Alain Globensky, and Charles Constantine. These men served as the guardians of the team's core of fast-skating, high-scoring offensive dynamos. Everything clicked in the 1975-76 season. Tardif exploded offensively, leading the WA in goals with 71, assists with 77, and total points with 148. In an era of run-and-gun offense, Tardif emerged as the league's brightest star, gliding with an effortless stride, threading pinpoint passes through narrow seams, and rifling shots past bewildered goaltenders. His dominance on the left wing was so complete that he was widely seen as one of the best, if not the best, at his position in all of professional hockey. With that spectacular season, Tardif claimed the WHA's MVP award and an invitation to represent Canada in the prestigious 1976 Canada Cup. Fate, however, had different plans in store, as a violent incident would soon rock Tardif's life and threaten his health and career. The Calgary Cowboys, a gritty, physically minded team, had given Tardif more trouble than anyone else during that banner season. He struggled to find the back of the net against them, and he brawled multiple times with their resident tough guys, notably Rick Joggio. Tardif even fought Butch Deadmarsh, leaving few illusions about the Cowboys' bruising, disruptive style. As the playoffs began, hockey fans expected the Nordics, first in their division and boasting the league's most potent offense, to steamroll the Cowboys. The mismatch seemed so glaring that many predicted a 4 or 5 game series at most. In an effort to stir up publicity, Calgary coach Joe Crozier made a theatrical move prior to Game 1. He took his enforcers, Joggio, Deadmarsh, and Peter Driscoll, to a local boxing gym, staged a photo shoot, and declared that they were ready to duke it out with anyone from Quebec. Whether it was gamesmanship or psychological warfare, the stunt coincided with a surprising outcome in the series opener. Calgary stunned Quebec 3-1, stealing home ice. The Nordics, having soared through the regular season, suddenly felt the sting of adversity. Tension hung in the air like an impending storm as Game 2 began. Early in the match, Gordie Gallant clashed with Joggio in a scuffle. Both were assessed major penalties, meaning Joggio was still in the penalty box when Tardif scored a goal for the Nordics. Then, later in the period, with Tardif momentarily vulnerable along the boards in the defensive zone, Joggio came off the bench with a singular, malicious intention. As described by Quebec goaltender Richard Brodeur, Joggio rushed toward Tardif and unleashed a cross-check to his face. The impact, made worse by the fact that Tardif did not wear a helmet, sent him crashing backward. His skull smacked violently against the ice, rendering him unconscious immediately. Worse still, even as Tardif lay motionless, Giorgio began raining punches down upon him, as blood poured from Tardif's nose and mouth. In the chaos that followed, Brodeur leapt into the fray, and both teams cleared their benches. It took nearly 45 minutes, a flurry of ejections, 179 combined penalty minutes, and the intervention of local Quebec police to restore some semblance of calm. Tardif was wheeled off on a stretcher, rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The horrifying visuals stunned the hockey world. It wasn't simply a tough checker or run-of-the-mill fight. To onlookers, it resembled an assault more than a part of the sport. The Nordics organization lashed out, demanding Giorgio be banned for life. The Cowboys and their supporters pushed back, accusing Quebec of exaggerating Tardif's injuries. Calgary's coach Joe Crozier received a suspension for the remainder of the series, while the WHA's vice president of operations, Bud Poyle, resigned in protest of the entire fiasco. Tardif lay in a hospital bed, unconscious and gravely hurt, making all the bickering around him both surreal and infuriating. Though Tardif survived, doctors diagnosed him with a severe concussion and significant brain trauma. He spent the next 4 months in various stages of recovery, unable to resume even basic training until late in the summer of 1976. As a result, he missed the 1976 Canada Cup, an opportunity that would have showcased his abilities to a global audience. That blow was devastating emotionally. Being in line for a spot on Team Canada is an honor reserved for the elite, and Tardif had more than earned that distinction. Now, it slipped away, lost to a senseless act of violence. The legal ramifications were also serious. Giorgio ultimately faced criminal charges for assault. He pled guilty, an admission that was virtually unavoidable given the avalanche of incriminating evidence, including eyewitness testimonies and game footage. Hockey was no stranger to physical collisions, fights, and controversies, but this particular incident turned the sport's unwritten codes on their head. Some Canadian officials demanded that more players, or even coaches, be held legally accountable for on-ice violence. The entire ordeal took a toll on Tardif beyond the physical injuries. He struggled with headaches, dizzy spells, and a lingering sense of fear. He found it hard to trust opponents, to go into the corners with the same freewheeling abandon he once embraced. In interviews, he confessed that he sometimes felt a fraction of his old self. The knowledge that the slightest bump or slip of a check might trigger migraines or a concussion relapse haunted him. Even the simple act of having a beer or two could bring on disconcerting discomfort. In one candid moment, Tardif mentioned that he'd heard how serious head injuries had derailed other players, like Ted Green, and he sometimes worried that a full return to his prior level of play might be impossible. Yet, as the 1976-77 WA season began, Tardif gathered his courage and returned to the ice. Though burdened with physical limitations and psychological hurdles, he still managed 49 goals in 62 games. With the help of a deep Nordics roster, he contributed significantly to the team's first and only Avco Cup championship, a thrilling 7-game series against the Winnipeg Jets. The emotional high of that victory served as a measure of redemption, but Tardif openly acknowledged that he remained traumatized by flashbacks of the brutal cross-check and subsequent beating. The following year, 1977-78, Tardif found another gear, re-establishing himself as a goal-scoring phenom. He racked up 65 goals, added 89 assists, and ended the season with 154 points, surpassing the single-season scoring record previously held by Phil Esposito in the NHL. Tardif's accomplishments in the WA, 2 MVP awards, 4 All-Star appearances, and an astonishing total of 666 points in 446 games, cemented his legacy as one of the most extraordinary talents of the time. Critics might point to the somewhat looser style of the WA when compared to the NHL, but there's no denying that Tardif was among the best anywhere in pro hockey. All the while, the hockey landscape was shifting. By 1979, the WA was on the verge of folding, and a handful of its teams, including the Quebec Nordics, merged with the NHL. Tardif was 30 years old, a pivotal age in a sport built around speed and youthful vigor. Although no longer at the apex of his powers, he still had plenty of skill. In the Nordics' first NHL season, he was on pace for 45 goals before being sidelined by injury, finishing with 68 points in 58 games. The emergence of young stars like Michel Goulet and the Slovakian brothers Peter, Anton, and Marian Stasny began to overshadow Tardif's presence in Quebec. Even so, he remained a potent scorer, netting 39 goals in 1981-82 and earning an NHL All-Star selection. In 1982-83, Tardif's playing time and role were reduced, partly due to friction with head coach Michel Bergeron. The coach demanded unrelenting defensive responsibility. Tardif, whose game was predicated on offense, was accused of half-hearted backchecking. The writing was on the wall that this season might be his last. That year, Tardif took the ice for the final time as an NHL player. His overall NHL numbers, 401 points in 517 regular season games, were respectable, but they only hinted at what might have been had he played top-line minutes in his prime or stayed in the NHL during his most prolific WA years. Despite the slightly anticlimactic ending to his on-ice career, Tardif remained beloved in Quebec. The Nordics retired his number 8, raising it to the rafters and honoring him as the second number ever retired by the franchise. Later, he was inducted into the Quebec Sports Hall of Fame, a testament to his prominent place in the province's rich hockey tradition. Life beyond the rink proved promising as well. Tardif channeled his competitive spirit into running successful Toyota and Kia dealerships, forging a stable and admirable presence in his community. He cultivated a fulfilling family life, devoting time to his children and, eventually, his grandchildren. Yet a specter lingered, a dark memory that refused to fade. For more than 3 decades, Tardif was plagued by recollections of that horrific night in 1976. He sometimes dreamed of being slammed into the ice and pummeled while defenseless. The question of what if hovered over him. What if the assault had ended his playing days or worse, led to permanent disability? He credited the doctors, trainers, and his family for helping him piece his life back together, but the psychological scars ran deep. He admitted he could never fully let go of the lingering resentment and the feeling that he had been wronged on a deeply personal level. Then, in 2007, an entirely unexpected moment of closure arrived. Rick Joggio, the very man who had carried out the brutal cross-check and blows that nearly ended Tardif's career, was traveling through Quebec for a Pee-wee tournament with his sons. Perhaps feeling the weight of a 31-year-old burden, Joggio approached a local reporter to ask if it might be possible to arrange a brief meeting with Tardif. The reporter contacted Tardif, who was astonished by the request. Though Tardif felt nerves and an emotional swirl at the thought of confronting the man who had caused him so much pain, he agreed. On a designated day, Joggio arrived at one of Tardif's car dealerships, accompanied by his 2 sons. Joggio approached Tardif, who stood tall but apprehensive, memories of that disastrous night undoubtedly flooding back. The children, unfamiliar with the full gravity of what had happened in 1976, watched their father and this other man with subdued curiosity. Joggio then uttered the words he had likely rehearsed in his head for years. He apologized, earnestly, for the harm he had inflicted, the assault that had cut so deeply into Tardif's life. He then offered a hug. The crowd went silent. Tardif, usually composed, felt tears welling up. He later confessed he could barely articulate the swirl of feelings that overwhelmed him: anger, relief, confusion, gratitude, all tangled together. The handshake that followed was brief but weighty, as if symbolically releasing decades of bitterness. Joggio's apology and Tardif's acceptance of it was a testament to the power of time and reflection, 2 forces that can wear down even the hardest emotional armor. Tardif admitted that for years he had occasionally imagined running into Joggio somewhere, perhaps by chance at an event or in a hallway. In many of those imagined scenarios, he didn't know how he would react. To see Joggio arrive voluntarily, wanting to atone, took a courage and humility Tardif respected. He wondered if he would have been bold enough to seek reconciliation had the roles been reversed. In the grand tapestry of hockey's history, Marc Tardif remains a fascinating figure. His name might not come up as frequently as some of his contemporaries, Wayne Gretzky, Bobby Hull, Gordie Howe, but Tardif's record-breaking feats in the WA stack up impressively. 2 Stanley Cups, 1 Avco Cup, a Memorial Cup, multiple MVPs, multiple goal-scoring titles, and a heartfelt devotion to the sport all combined to make him worthy of broader recognition. One could even argue his timeline was simply unfortunate. He debuted on a Canadian squad so star-studded that it could barely accommodate another budding star, then thrived in a rival league that was often dismissed by conservative hockey loyalists, and returned to the NHL just in time to find himself overshadowed by younger talents in Quebec. Nevertheless, Tardif's story resonates on a human level that transcends statistics. The harrowing near-fatal blow, the courage to come back, the struggle with lingering mental and physical trauma, and the eventual resolution decades later. Hockey can be a microcosm of life, complete with intense highs and crushing lows, feats of athletic brilliance, and moments of violence that spark both condemnation and introspection. Tardif endured it all, forging a legacy that combined triumph and resilience in equal measure. When he looks back on his path, from junior hockey phenom in Montreal to a battered victim in a hospital bed, from a revered hero in Quebec to a businessman confronting his assailant face to face, Tardif can take pride in having navigated a course few can fathom. The handshake he shared with Joe Gio in 2007 at that Quebec car dealership offered a sense of completion. It did not erase the nightmares or restore the physical well-being lost in that moment of brutality, but it represented understanding, an act of contrition on one side and acceptance on the other. Today, Tardif's numbered jersey still hangs in the rafters, a silent tribute to the damage he wreaked on opponents with his scoring prowess and the glory he brought to the Quebec Nordics. He is also commemorated in the Quebec Sports Hall of Fame, a revered local hero who still appears at alumni events or charitable causes, always greeted by the fond recollections of fans who watched him at his peak. Many recall the lightning speed and magician's hands that could produce electrifying goals. Some remember the man who bravely fought to regain his old form after an incident many believed would end his career. At its heart, Marc Tardif's journey underscores how redemption and reconciliation can emerge from even the darkest episodes. Hockey is known for fierce rivalries and high emotions, and the 1970s were a boiling cauldron of that intensity, sometimes stepping over the line. Tardif's resilience in facing that violence, coupled with his subsequent willingness to open his arms in forgiveness, is a powerful reminder of how sports can reflect the full range of the human condition. Even in a game built around aggression, skill, and speed, there can be moments of closure and understanding that transcend the scoreboard. Though he might not be as universally celebrated as some legendary names, Tardif's professional resume stands among the best. A two-time WA MVP, multiple league scoring titles, champion in both the NHL and the WA. Record-setting feats. He's an all-time great whose recognized achievements might still be overshadowed by the big markets and bigger personalities of his day. That said, among fans of the WA and the Quebec Nordics, Marc Tardif remains revered. In more recent years, hockey historians and statisticians have championed the idea that Tardif's name belongs in broader Hall of Fame discussions. While that recognition has not arrived at the highest official levels, to those who witnessed his brilliance up close, Marc Tardif is already a Hall of Famer in every sense that matters. Marc Tardif left an undeniable mark on hockey, but his legacy remains largely overshadowed. A dominant force in the WA and a key player in the NHL, he earned his place among the game's greats. But does he deserve a spot in the Hockey Hall of Fame? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into hockey's forgotten stars, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out our next video on another legend of the game. Thanks for watching.